It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank District Attorney Krasner for allowing us to be here and for allowing his agency to participate, along with Chief Defender Keir Bradford Gray and Staff Inspector Fran Healy from the Philadelphia Police Department. What we're here to talk about is the initial report being issued by a group called the Philadelphia Event Review Team. The Event Review Team was created at the request of the Quattrone Center with the agencies that are here, along with the First Circuit Court of Common Pleas and the Criminal Justice Advisory Board, or CJAB, of Philadelphia County. I'm going to spend a couple minutes just giving you the history of the Philadelphia Event Review Team and how we got to where we are and why we think it's important, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues to share some of their experiences with you. The Quattrone Center was created about 5 years ago to bring quality improvement to the criminal justice system. We call what we do a systems approach to prevent errors in the system of criminal justice. So, like any other complex system, criminal justice is made up of humans. Sometimes humans get it wrong. And the question that the Quattrone Center has asked is, what if we take principles of error reduction, quality improvement, safety improvement from other complex industries like transportation or healthcare, and we apply them to the criminal justice system to help everybody in the system reduce errors and achieve better results. When there's a plane crash or a train derailment or a medical error or wrong side surgery or something like that, what those industries will do is they will gather together a multi-stakeholder group of people and interview all of the participants involved, not with the question being who gets blamed or who gets fired, but with the question being how can we learn from this event that nobody wanted and get improvements that we can reinsert into the system to make it work better going forward. So rather than the retrospective accountability that typically comes from litigation, what we're talking about here is these organizations voluntarily participating in a process together to achieve forward-looking accountability, where we acknowledge that something that we didn't want to have happen has happened, but we try to pull whatever we can that's positive out of it and apply it going forward so that next time this situation arises, we get a better result. In 2016, the Quattrone Center approached the CJAB with the idea that we would do this kind of root cause analysis, sometimes called a sentinel event review, because the Department of Justice's R&D arm, the National Institute of Justice, had created a grant seeking to fund just exactly this sort of opportunity. We thought that the collaborative enterprise, the collaborative nature of the organizations that are here today would lend itself to this sort of approach. We put together a grant together with the CJAB and these agencies, and were successful in getting NIJ funding that allowed us to pursue a case of our choice. I want to emphasize that this was a completely voluntary procedure, and there was no incentive other than how do we make the system better. And all of these agencies that might often be thought of as adversarial put individual differences aside and all agreed to come together and look at a case for the common good. Now, the report that we're issuing today is the case that we selected first. It's a case of a man named George Cortez. Mr. Cortez was convicted in 2012 of a murder and shooting of a second individual in North Philadelphia in 2011. He was convicted largely on the basis of a single source known eyewitness identification. In other words, the person who identified Mr. Cortez as the shooter was the surviving victim, and she knew Mr. Cortez. And based on what was seemingly an appropriate eyewitness identification, the Philadelphia police, after an investigation, brought charges which the DA moved forward with. The case went to trial in 2012. There were some irregularities at trial based on the defendant's alibi. He had an alibi that involved a video that was to be shown on a flip phone. The video purported to be Mr. Cortez at his son's birthday party at the time that the murder was being committed. Because the video was on a flip phone, the judge, trying to better show the video to the jurors, asked the DA to take possession of the phone and display it on a large screen that the DA had been using to show other evidence in the courtroom. When that happened, the DA's technical services unit extracted all videos from the phone in an effort to then play them on the screen. The report that was generated along with this extraction showed that the date and timestamp on the video in question was actually an hour different from what it was supposed to be, causing the prosecution's technical service unit to conclude that Mr. Cortez and his wife had manipulated the date and timestamp on the cell phone to facilitate the alibi. For a variety of reasons, that happened literally the night before Mr. Cortez was supposed to testify. The DA rapidly put together an expert report making this known. The judge allowed that report in, allowed the Technical Services Unit representative to testify as an expert. Mr. Cortez's alibi was discredited, and he was convicted. Mr. Cortez's appellate team included a young man who did a quick Google search. The Google search revealed that there was an error in the operating system of the phone that caused the phone not to deal with daylight savings time. So the hour difference was not actually a manipulation of the video for alibi purposes, but instead a glitch simply dealing with daylight savings time in the operating system of the phone. The appellate team brought this to the DA's office. The DA's office, to its credit, offered to reinvestigate the case. In doing so, they discovered new evidence suggesting that, in fact, Mr. Cortez was innocent, and after a brief period of time, his brother Owen actually confessed to the crime, and charges were dropped against Mr. Cortez. Now, in a lot of ways, this case is unique, but in a lot of ways, this case is something that happens every day in Philadelphia with the complexity of our criminal justice system, challenges with getting witnesses to participate in investigations, and other struggles. And our review, which encompassed a number of people who had participated in the case from all of the participants, the police, the DA's office, the defense attorneys, and the courts, revealed that everybody involved in the case was trying to do the best thing and get the right result. And notwithstanding that, there were a number of different contributing factors, some of which you can no doubt infer from the story I've just told, any of which, if we had interfered with them at the time, probably would have resulted in Mr. Cortez not being convicted of this crime. But all of them coming together contributed to a wrongful conviction that nobody had sought and nobody wanted. What the group did then was gather those contributing factors and talk about how to make reforms that were specific to those contributing factors. And that's what we have to issue today, is the report that shows both those contributing factors and the reforms that each of the agencies involved have agreed to work together to implement. So it was a very, very successful process. This is one of the first times in the United States that this has happened, that the different stakeholders in the criminal justice system have come together really for the good of the system as a whole. We feel like we've established a really strong foundation, but I can't thank the team around me enough. And I also want to thank the Quattrone Center participants, Ross Miller, our assistant director, our fellows who participated in the research, and both the CJAB and the NIJ for providing the funding that allowed this to happen. With that said, I'm going to step back. I'm going to turn it over to the district attorney to offer his thoughts.
Thank you to Mr. Holloway and Quattrone. So for the first time ever, the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office has participated in a multi-agency process organized by Quattrone for the fair administration of justice to improve the fairness and accuracy of our criminal justice system. There were some comments made about the fact that this is an adversarial system. We need to always remember that we cannot be adversarial to the truth. I know that the Philadelphia Police Department is not adversarial to the truth. I've spent a lot of time with Richard Ross, and I firmly believe that. I know the Public Defender's Office is not adversarial to the truth, and this office is not adversarial to the truth. So any efforts that we can make together, despite the fact that we have different lanes and we may be at different tables in a courtroom, in order to promote the truth, whether the truth is about guilt that was not solved in the past, or the truth is about innocence that was incorrectly called guilt, is something that we need to do together, and I'm proud to have the opportunity to do that with the Philadelphia Police Department, with the Public Defender's Office, and also with the Quattrone Center. As you know, George Cortez was wrongfully convicted of murder and ag assault in 2012. His conviction was vacated in 2015. Charges dropped altogether in 2016 after the real perpetrator confessed to the crime. And that is what a lot of people don't see when they talk about exonerations. They talk about, for example, in Chicago, there have been almost 85 exonerations in the last 2.5 years. What they miss is that every innocent person who is in a cell is a guilty person who went free. And so we are doing the same thing. These are two sides of the same coin. When we try to use modern methods, when we try to use scientifically vetted and appropriate ways of doing identification or doing DNA or whatever it may be. And that is why it is so essential. Judge Carolyn Temmin, our first assistant, who is seated right here, To my left, and a former judge of the Court of Common Pleas, represented the Philadelphia DA's office in the Philadelphia Event Review Team and was assisted by ADA Dana Bazelon. The DAO was delighted to participate in a thorough review of the Cortez case to determine where the system made errors in the case and how best to prevent similar errors in the future. We are grateful to the Quattrone Center for leading this process and all of the criminal justice partners for participating as well. Thank you.
Chief Defender?
All right. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here, John. I appreciate the Quattrone Center for all that they're doing and bringing us all together. But what I need to say, too, is that this is a remarkable day that many of us that we are considered adversarial are coming together and holding ourselves accountable, putting some accountability measures on what we do and the practices and policies that we create that may make these things more likely to happen. I think what we're seeing is, thank God that someone was able to say, hey, I did it, but we need a better process of ensuring on the front end that we do not have these types of outcomes. And that's what we were able to get out of this study, that we were able to get more practices and more processes that allowed us to take a look at certain things along the way. But there's one issue that's systemically glaring that is harder to identify, and that's the racial bias and inequities that go into some of these decisions. I think that there's only one opportunity to get it right on that end and make sure that bias and fear of race does not seep into the reason why people are brought to the system or treated harshly, and that is making sure that hearings are individualized on the front end. We have time and information that is passed and transferred that's open and honest about the entire process so that defense counsel can successfully defend their person that's being accused. These shouldn't be taken for granted. This happens on a number of occasions. We just sentenced or resentenced 328 juvenile lifers. Out of that 328 Philadelphia juvenile lifers, meaning those who, as juveniles, were sentenced to life without parole, 95% of them were black and brown. 83% were African American, 12% were Hispanic, 5% were white. There has to be a reason that overwhelming majority where it was decided by whoever's decision it was that they could get life without parole. There has to be some understanding as to why that disproportionate outcome came about. And we need to look at that. We can't take that for granted, and we can't use a policy or practice to get rid of it. Racial bias is real in our system. It's inherent in some of our decision making, and we need to make sure on the front end that we have opportunities to bring about humanization that is important to determination. When we say all lives matter, all lives should matter in the courtroom as well. And when we look at disproportionality such as that I just gave, we need to start looking at why. Where are the decisions that help contributed to that, and how can we make sure that we're not looking at people based on their race, but we're looking at them based on who they are. So that's all I have to say, and I look forward to remaining a part of this. I will thank the Defender Association's team, Byron Cotter. He was at the forefront of this effort, and he deals with people every day that are on probation and parole for things that they say that they did not do. So there's a lot to be gained from understanding how much race plays into some of these decisions. And I'm looking forward to being a part of any team that's looking forward to examining that.
Good morning. On behalf of Commissioner Ross, thank you for allowing the department at this briefing. I'd also like to thank the district attorney, the public defender, and especially Quattrone. I think it's important to note at the outset that the goal of the police department is to arrest offenders, without a doubt. But our goal is to arrest the right offenders. Because when we don't do that, obviously the offender's still out there victimizing. So it's incumbent upon us to find ways to make sure we do our job better. This approach here is innovative in the fact that it really models what they do in industry. If you've ever seen or ever been to a hospital where people write on your arms right and left, and the person asks you repeatedly your name in a hospital, all those type of things came out of a Sentinel event review of some catastrophic failure. So this is a concept that we're applying to criminal justice, which is innovative. Nobody in the country that I'm aware of is doing it, and the Philadelphia Police Department is very proud to be a part of it. Our goal is to find the best way to do our job, period. We understand when there's failures in the criminal justice system, it's not usually one person or one entity. It's usually minor little flaws along the way. If you can't sit down and trust your partners and all the rest of the criminal justice agency, you'll never find out where all those flaws will be. Therefore, they just continue. This is a process that I'm very proud to be a part of because we will. We identify those little mistakes, those little mishaps, those oversights that when they put together throughout the entire system create failures. Without us sitting together as a team, as a group, looking at these things without pointing fingers, we'll never be able to figure these problems out. So I think this is the first step. I love being a part of the initiative from Quattrone. This is the first police department that I'm aware of that's involved in this, and quite frankly, it wasn't an easy decision at first. We really had to bare our souls. We were very honest in these meetings, and there's no holds barred. We tell everything. I mean, so there's got to be a lot of trust and trust building that goes on, and we've done that over the last several years. We've created the trust and the relationship that can now move this project forward in a more advanced way to find those small problems that each of us can fix very quickly, hopefully, and make the system better eventually over time. Thank you.
All right, so that's the end of the prepared remarks. If there are any questions, we'd be happy to field questions for a few minutes. Well, the report's been generated. The idea is because each of the participating agencies participated in the creation of the proposed recommendations that we've got a path for each agency to begin implementing them. That's obviously a process that can take some time in large organizations, but hopefully the recommendations then get implemented, and we're actively talking amongst ourselves about what the next case will be, and we're hoping that this will continue to be a cyclical, iterative process just the way it is in these other industries that we referenced.